Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us on a Saturday afternoon. We are so excited today to be talking with Beatriz Williams about her new book, Her Last Flight. Beatriz is the best-selling author of 11 novels, including The Golden Hour, The Summer Wives, 100 Summers, and The Wicked Redhead. A native of Seattle, she graduated from Stanford University and earned an MBA in finance from Columbia University. She lives with her husband and 4 children near the Connecticut shore, where she divides her time between writing and laundry. How are you today?
I'm great, thank you. I was just saying, right now I'm dividing my time between writing, laundry, and getting stuck in the traffic. Everybody heading up to the Cape for the weekend. Saturday is the big, rentals changeover day. So I'm trying to let that stress dissolve from being on the highway with everybody, their cars strapped on the back. But it's great to be here. I'm so excited to be talking about this book that I've just been so in love with it ever since I finished writing it. So it's great to be on the road. Well, virtually on the road talking about it.
Yeah, I'm so excited that we were able to get this set up because as Beatriz and I were just talking some spoilery stuff that we couldn't share with everybody beforehand, but I just finished the book and I absolutely loved it. While we were chatting, guys, if you have any questions, you can drop them in the Facebook comments, and after I have my questions for Beatriz, we will pass those along so that way she can answer your questions as well. So just real easy to get started off, you want to tell us your elevator pitch for the new book?
I'm very bad at elevator pitches, especially since I don't have to be pitching people in elevators anymore. Yeah. But basically this kind of all came out of my childhood obsession with Amelia Earhart. The book is in fact a very loosely inspired by Amelia's story. And it started out as kind of a little what if. I think I may have seen one of these newspaper articles you occasionally get about a jar of freckle cream that was found on some island in the Pacific. Maybe it was Amelia's. And that kind of got my creative juices flowing a bit. And I've always been fascinated by aviation. My father was a pilot, and I just found this out when I was in college, I think. I didn't know about this because this was actually, he's British. So, it's very, never complain, never explain. And he'd had this heartbreaking disappointment with his big RAF career. He was in the Leeds University Air Squadron, which is sort of like a university training group for RAF pilots. And so as soon as he graduated, he was their top pilot, and they flew him out to Singapore to start his advanced training, and that's when they figured out that he was in fact colorblind for red and green, which was something he had not let on. And his working hypothesis is that his instructor at college had a crush on him, and that was why he passed him through all his evaluations, even though he was colorblind. He's like, I think he might have had a crush on me. I'm like, oh well, at least you got that far then. So but it was a great disappointment to him. I think this was his dream, and his dream died, and it was very, I think, disappointing. So he never talked about it growing up. And then when I was in college, he started gliding. So gliding is it's like an airplane with no engines and very long wings. They use them a lot in World War II. And you go up on a tow plane and you stay aloft that way. So I started going up with him on these glide planes, and sometimes I'd get a ride in the tow plane, which is very barnstormy feeling. They charge like $50 for a tow, and they kind of go up and down. But so it was my first experience in a small airplane, and I just love to fly, and I have never been able to get over the miracle of flight. I am always the one in the window seat, in the airplane with my nose pressed to the plexiglass, just staring at this gorgeous, miraculous earth below us. And so I was very excited to take on this project, and I did all kinds of research. And like I said, it's loosely based on Amelia's story, but it really, she's more of a composite character. There were so many other female pilots and so many other pilot stories out there. So the brief elevator pitch, I'm getting around to it, I promise, is that in 1937, this woman pilot, this Irene Foster, she's the most famous woman in the world, as Amelia Earhart would have been in 1937. She disappears on a round-the-world flight over the Sahara Desert. And then in 1947, a young woman named Janie Everett arrives in a remote village in Hawaii, thinking she has found out what happened to Irene Foster all those years. So she encounters a woman there, Irene Lindquist, and together they sort of pick each other apart and discover not just the secret of what happened to Irene Foster, but also her instructor and flying partner, Sam Mallory, who disappeared fighting with the Loyalist forces in the Spanish Civil War around the same time as Irene herself disappeared. So that is, in a nutshell, the basic groundwork of the story. But of course, it kind of, you know, took root and grew from there. It was just a really wonderful writing experience for me. And I certainly have gotten the most amazing response from readers on this one. I kind of went in feeling like I think I just wrote my best book ever, and so many readers have agreed with me. It's really been terrific, you know, reading all the comments and messages I've gotten back. So
I'm glad you mentioned kind of why you were so drawn to airplanes, because one of my questions was, like, you really seem to have a thing for like machines. Like in a couple of the Juliana Gray books, they're about kind of like early automobiles. And so like it's really interesting to me that kind of machinery, cars and airplanes play such big parts throughout kind of your whole writing body of work.
You know, it's kind of funny. I don't consider myself particularly sort of, but you know, machiney. But my father's an engineer, and he would have considered it, you know, failure on his part if he ever had to take a car into the shop, like if he couldn't fix it himself. We had this Volkswagen Bug, and like he had to sort of take the engine apart and rebuild it like 3 different times because it had broken down. And you know, so and maybe I think I kind of absorbed that. I'm kind of one of those weird people. I got exactly this, and this is back before there was like SAT coaching, so it was like real SAT scores, right? You know, I just went in one day, you know, without any prep, and just like took the test, and I got like sort of exactly this. And I, you know, when I even took it for, you know, my GMATs years later, you know, the exact same score for verbal and math, which is weird because I consider myself so much more verbal than mathematical, but I guess I've got that engineering mind. And even, you know, if you look at The Secret Life of Violet Grant, you know, the physics, I do love science. I'm not, you know, great at all this sort of, I could not take apart an engine. I certainly couldn't, you know, at this point, you know, do physics, but I'm fascinated by it. And I'm fascinated by the story that the machine tells, the story that the mathematics and the physics tell about, you know, us and our place in the universe.
One of the things, you know, that's kind of integral to a Beatriz Williams book is kind of that dual timeline thing. And have you done another book like this one where the timelines are so close together?
Well, 100 Summers, I think is the one that's closest to that, you know, where you have 2, you know, we have Lily Dane in I believe it's 31 or 32, and then in, of course, the summer of 1938. So those are pretty close together. And I mean, I guess a certain age has 2 voices. It's this mostly the same time period, but it's 2 different women's voices. So I do sort of play around with it a lot. But yes, you know, the thing that the twist that I made with this dual timeline is that Irene's story, that side of the narrative, is told as excerpts from a biography that Janie writes about her, presumably, you know, years later. So the thing to remember, and the thing that was kind of fun for me writing it, is that even Irene's story, so you know, Janie is told sort of first person, we get to know her very intimately, but Irene's story is also told by Janie. Janie's the one writing her biography. So that raises a lot of, you know, narrative questions, and it was a lot of fun for me. That was the first part I wrote. I always write each narrative in its entirety, or almost. Usually the mystery part I get kind of close enough to the end, even if I still have to choreograph exactly how it all comes together. And then I write the mystery solving narrative. So here I am writing Irene's story, and I know it's Janie writing the biography, and I haven't written Janie yet. So I don't really, you know, I'm learning both Janie and Irene as I'm going along. So it was really kind of a neat, and it took me a little while to get going with Irene's narrative for that reason, as I'm trying to get a feel for Irene and for Janie at the same time. So I sort of wrote the first third of the book over and over again several times, trying to get it right. And that took months, and then I get to Janie's part and I wrote that in like 3 or 4 weeks. It was just, I just hit that great writing rhythm, and I just knew this person and I just connected with her, and it was fantastic. So it's definitely, of all the books I've written, that's definitely the one where there's the most difference in writing one narrative versus another narrative.
It also seemed like it was one of the kind of most interaction we get to see, because if there are two heroines in a book, like we don't usually get to see them kind of interact as much as they did in this one. So that was really nice too.
Yeah, and they're two very independent women. So there's definitely some kind of sparks flying, and they both have their secrets to hide from each other. And it was so fun having them face off. It's just like one of those old movies, where you have the two, very strong-willed women. I just, as a side note, this whole Karen thing is like, I kind of write a lot of Karens. I mean, I think a lot of my characters would be like, I want to see the manager, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It's obviously, there's obviously other aspects of the Karen personality but I mean, I don't think we need to necessarily knock women just for being assertive and for not, accepting second best from anyone. And I think a lot about me, especially, I've never asked for the manager of my life. I'm just like, just whatever you want to do is fine with me, so I love having these women to play with who do have that assertiveness, who aren't going to back down, who aren't going to just, take whatever people are willing to give them and be happy with that. They go out there and they kind of forge their own destinies. And I love, and having two of them together on the same page, that was just a whole lot of fun for me.
Yeah. So you mentioned, Janie is working on a biography of Irene, and in the book, she talks about how she's a photojournalist, but she's talking about how she wants to write kind of a new kind of biography that's not just kind of boring facts and figures, but be able to kind of fill in all of that stuff. And I mean, you've sort of done that a couple of times, like with this one, with it loosely being based on Amelia Earhart, and with Tiny Little Thing too. So how do you balance kind of being able to take the real person and then your fictional character? What's the balance there?
It's definitely, it's like a starting point. I take that person's, because first of all, I feel like we can never really know somebody who, especially existed as a historical figure. And, we only know them through what they left behind. We are never able to actually be inside that person's head. Even if diaries, I mean, anyone who's a historical figure knows the diary is going to get read. The letters that they send out to people are going to get read. So, they're always kind of presenting a face to the world. Anytime you write about a historical figure, you're going to have that problem. How do you really know who this person is and what the actual voice inside their head is saying? What I like to do is just, in the case of Tiny Little Thing, where I was definitely had some, inspirations of, so the Kennedys and Jackie's place within the Kennedys. I just take that as my starting point. I take that, gosh, that's an interesting situation to be in. And in Amelia's case, I think some of the things that really, not just obviously the mystery of her disappearance, but also various elements in her life. Amelia was not the best female pilot of her generation by a long shot. She was obviously a great pilot by anyone's standards, but she was not the best. And, she was not actually that great under pressure. She was not a great navigator. She was not good at radio, which is ultimately what, sort of led to her getting lost in the end, as sort of causative, factors. But, it's what was, Amelia, in Amelia's favor was that, first of all, she looked the part, right? In fact, she could have been Charles Lindbergh's twin sister. Interestingly, if you look at them just physically, they're the same type, and they have the same complexion and the same coloring and the same look to them, and she's tall and skinny, just like, Lindbergh's tall and skinny. So they both have that same look to them. So she looks like Lindbergh, and Lindbergh is obviously America's hero at that point. So that is in her favor. And obviously she is daring and she's willing to do things. She's very articulate. She talks very eloquently about women going out and doing adventurous things. And she's able to communicate that really well to audiences. But the third thing, which was really interesting to me, is that she also had a really good career manager from the very beginning. Her very first sort of publicity flight was, she was a woman in a flight that was going transatlantic. And this guy named George Putnam was the guy who put this all together. Now, George Putnam, which is interesting for us in the publishing business, he was a scion of the Putnam publishing dynasty, right? So that was, I was like, oh my gosh, because Putnam was actually my original publisher when I first, my first few books. So I thought that was really interesting. And in fact, the character that I have who kind of approximates him, I named him George Morrow. And of course,
loved that. I got to that and I just started laughing. I was trying to explain it to my husband. He was like, why is this funny? I'm like, no, this is really funny.
It's like a total publishing in-joke, George Morrow, get it? Wink, wink. I'm glad you caught that. And all the booksellers were like, oh my God, it's hilarious. And readers are like, what? So anyway, that's the explanation for that one. But he was a great publicist. He was so good at promoting her to the world, and he arranged all these lecture tours for her. But she was clearly getting very burnt out on this after a while. And I can tell you just from doing a short book tour, as much as I love being out there talking to readers, after day 12, when it's like a new day, every day it's a new city, and it's, and you're answering a lot of the same questions over and over, and you have to make it fresh. It's definitely getting to burnout territory very quickly, but she had to do, flying's very expensive. You had to do it in order to just buy a plane, keep it running, keep it maintained. So she's almost like she's kind of stuck, and I think there's definitely that feeling of entrapment as you get later on into her career. Even though she's doing these amazing things, she's only happy when she's in the cockpit of her airplane, just doing what she loves. So I thought that was really fascinating. And I should quickly say, for any, descendants of G.P. Putnam out there, that he is not supposed to be a carbon copy. In fact, my George Morrow is, probably more a problematic person than Putnam was. But I just thought that was a fascinating aspect of her career. And I really wanted to sort of bring that out. But on the other hand, as I was reading about these other female pilots and about other flying teams, there were a lot of male-female flying teams, and there was varying degrees of sexual tension between them. I found that fascinating. I read an amazing book about the Dole Derby. So this was once Lindbergh conquered the Atlantic, the Dole Pineapple Company thought it'd be a great idea to put a prize for a race from San Francisco to Honolulu. As the first person to sort of, that you couldn't do the whole Pacific at that point, but part of the Pacific. And so that was very exciting. And people who were really skilled turned up, but also people who were like no hopers and who ended up just crashing in the Pacific. It was just horrible. And another thing that kind of I found fascinating was this great book called The Lost Pilots, about this, not husband and wife. He actually had a wife, but they became a team, and she was on board because having a woman on board brought you publicity. And they went on this long marathon flight, and sort of the way you had to puddle hop, through countries with varying degrees of, airports and, technological capability. So all of these things I just found so fascinating, and that sort of mentality you get into when you're on a marathon flight where you have to fly straight for 30 hours without taking a nap, just so fascinating. So many aspects of the experience, and just the psychology of these people who would get in these airplanes. And, your chances of dying were pretty, you were quite likely to die if you decided to be a pilot in that era. If you were killed, out fighting in World War I, you were going to get killed as a barnstormer. You're going to get killed on one of these, these long marathon flights. It was so dangerous. You would watch your colleagues crash and die in the most horrible ways. So, the mentality, not just of the pilots themselves, why they flew, why they kept flying, how they kept flying, the amount of alcohol they had to drink to numb this, but also the families left on the ground, around, watching your loved one go up and facing danger, watching your fiance, your spouse, your parent, how do you endure that? And not just that, have to deal with them when they're on the ground, because these are going to be pretty difficult people. So all of that I kind of wanted to integrate into this story. So it's got a lot of facets and layers to it. And it was just such a fascinating book to write.
So Anissa asked in the comments, was this one of your hardest books to research?
Absolutely. Definitely. I think anytime you've got a lot of technical research that you have to, you have to delve into, it definitely, it was a huge deep dive for me. I have not actually flown an airplane, but I have been a passenger, not just obviously jet airliners, but also, like I said, with my dad. So I was drawing on that experience. But it's also a research with a lot of rabbit holes, and if you're not careful, you have to balance that curiosity with like, oh, wait a minute, what about this? And there you are, the rest of the day you've spent traveling down a rabbit hole. So the challenge was not just to sort of gain a sense of just the breadth of the aviation scene in the 20s and 30s, but also just that depth. Okay, what am I going to focus on? What key aspects of this, or is this going to be like a 500-page novel? No, it's I want to try to keep it to 300 to 400 pages. So you have to really decide, okay, what am I going to focus on here? And balancing that sort of human aspect and just giving enough of the technical aspect that you're not boring the reader and that you're not going off on long, explanations of things. You want to integrate all that technical stuff, historical stuff, backstory stuff as naturally as you can into the plot. So inevitably, 95% of what is not on the page. It's sort of absorbed into the knowledge that you bring to the page. And that's the key, is knowing what to include and what to hold back on, and when to just stop and say, okay, I've done enough research. It's time to just focus on the story, which is why I'm writing this book. Otherwise, I would just be writing a nonfiction book about, the flying scene in the 20s and 30s. It was very challenging, but also in a really good, fascinating way. I had so many great research books out there.
So if you guys are tuning in and you are new to Beatriz's world, she has a complete world in the books. They're all mostly standalone, so you can pick most of them up without having read any of the others, but you're always going to find characters from the other books kind of popping up. And if you don't know it, it's just a character on the page. And if you do, there are these fun little Easter eggs. So Beatriz, how does this one connect with kind of the wider Beatriz Williams world?
Yes, so it connects with my book, A Certain Age. And there are a pair of characters, and I don't want to give away too many spoilers, a pair of characters at the end of that book who go off to California and start an aviation company. And I tended to get a lot of questions from readers. Well, what happened to them? Were they successful? What did they do? What was their life like? And then I had a lot of people also saying, wait a minute, so your whole childhood was on the West Coast. You grew up in Seattle, college in California, and added to that, my mother's family. My father's British, but my mother was raised in Southern California back when it was, orange groves, and it was not like the OC as it is now. But she grew up there, so I spent a lot of my summers there, a lot of my sort of time off with my grandparents in Southern California. So I know that that area so well. So people are like, why don't you ever set anything in California? So I kind of combined those two. And I always thought, well, maybe at some point I'll do a book about aviation in California in the 20s and 30s. And so finally, this is kind of the book that brought all that together, and the Amelia spark, and then that sort of index card in the back of my brain that I should do a book about aviation in California in that era. That was kind of how it all came together. So it was exciting for me to write a book that is not set in my usual East Coast stronghold, and yet still be able to incorporate characters. And these are two very beloved characters who we see turn up, and they do actually play a bit of a role in the book as well. So I love being able to do that. And I try not to plan a book around it, but when I'm in that stage of like, okay, what do I write next? What idea should I be working on? in the back of my mind, there's always that, okay, how can do I have the characters that I've sort of left out there hanging that I could then, tell their story or their epilogue, I guess, through this other book that I'm writing.
So do any of them ever surprise you, or you're working on something, you're like, oh, wait a minute, I didn't know that this person was going to pop up here?
Oh, all the time. I love that. And, it's, so the book I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but the book I just turned, so writing advice for would-be writers, try not to have your book come out the same week that you are trying to finish a manuscript and turn it in. This was not the plan. This was coronavirus's plan. I have 4 kids. They have all been home. The oldest is in college. I've got a high school senior. My standard line when people ask me, how do you balance 4 kids and writing? I'm like, well, when the school bus leaves, then I can sit down and write. And obviously there's been no school bus. I have been running a full service bed and breakfast 24/7 since mid-March. So my book did not end up getting written on time. But in that book that I just finished, now that I'm over the fog of having written it, I'm really excited about it. It's a Cold War book, Cold War Spies. And in that book, I kind of have a couple of characters. The main characters are loosely based on a character in the Cambridge spy ring, this guy, Donald McLean. Not many people in the US know about the Cambridge spy ring, but it's basically these sort of young, privileged men who attended Cambridge in the 1930s who were radicalized. Obviously, the 1930s was a very low point for capitalism, and communism was very, very fashionable among that sort of intellectual elite. And the Soviets recruited them as spies, and they ended up going to like the highest echelons of the British establishment and were turning over all this information to Stalin. So it's an exciting story, and then just the psychology. So I'm sort of writing this, and I just somehow, some Skylers popped in there. And yes, so it turns out that my main character is the daughter of, let me see if I can get this straight. She is the daughter of the older sister of, my 3 Schuyler sisters, their mother, who's also named Vivian. And she married Charles Schuyler. And so this is her older sister's children. So that Vivian, like the worst mom ever, is this my main character's aunt. So she turns up with Tiny and Pepper and little Vivian when they're like little kids, and they takes them to England for the summer and stays with them. So I had so much fun with like Tiny. They end up playing this game of American baseball in the yard, and Tiny's the umpire because she loves rules, and I just had so much fun with it. And it was truly like a pop-up. It was like, I think, and there it was. So that was a lot of fun. And I hope that my Schuyler fans out there will love this view of the 3 Schuyler sisters when they were little.
So do you have kind of an extensive like family tree and like timeline mapped out anywhere?
There is one, and it is in desperate need of updating. If I ever get a moment to myself that I am not desperately on deadline or releasing a book or doing the next, Willie White and Williams book or something, I will get that thing updated. Sadly, with, now my youngest, sorry, my oldest and my second oldest are now going to be in college. So I cannot afford a PA to do this for me. So I will have to do it all myself. But so there is a Schuyler family tree on my website. If you go, I think it's in the frequently asked questions section. If you kind of dig around in there, you'll find it. And but I also have it all in my head, and there is more to it than there are definitely little placeholders for like, okay, at some point I want to tell that story or that story or that story. I will say this, that the mother lode of all Schuyler reveals is going to be in the Wicked City series, the one that I am contemplating to go after the Wicked Redhead, which was out in December. So a lot of Schuyler poop is going to hit the fan in the next Wicked City book. So I'm very excited for that. This is something I have known about since I wrote Tiny Little Thing.
Oh.
Yeah. Everyone always like, well, what was that awful thing that that Tiny's mother, who is, by the way, the same Vivian Schuyler that we've been talking about, what has she got on Frank Hardcastle Sr.? Well,
Ooh. I
Yes.
can't believe that The Wicked Redhead came out in December. It feels like it was like 400 years ago.
It exactly, and and then the month after that was a very busy winter for me,
Yeah.
and another reason why this book ended up being so late that I just wrote. But the All the Ways We Said Goodbye, which is the latest Willig White and Williams book, we were on tour for that in in January. We were with you, right?
I know, that's crazy. I can't believe I actually saw you this
Only
year.
a few months ago, and the world has changed. World, and so
Yeah.
I was so excited to come back and talk about Her Last Flight, and here we are on screens, and it's great, and it's lovely to be connecting. But it would be so much nicer to be sipping drinks by the pool at the Zaza, and then popping over in the big Longhorn, Cadillac that they've got to schlep us back and forth. But
if it makes you feel any better, if you were here today, our heat index is 112.
Okay, so.
So there are some bonus points to this. It's not 112 there.
I know, and I always go to Arizona to see the Poison Pen people who are fantastic, and then I come to Houston for Murdered by the Book, and it's always like July, and so it's that's when I need the keratin treatments for my hair. So I did save a little money on my keratin treatment.
There you go.
I wasn't book touring in the South.
I'm just scrolling through some of the Facebook comments here. So Anne asks, what are you currently reading?
Right now, I am in Zombieland because I just turned this book in. But I'll tell you, the books that are, I did read actually a lot of the fiction that I read as I was writing my Cold War book that is now turned in. I was reading a lot of John Le Carre, which is great because it gives you such detail and gritty atmosphere about that whole post-war Cold War spy thing. But I'm sort of getting to I think I'm on the 5th one right now, and I'm like, he's not very good with women, is he? Like, the female characters are not. And he's great in every other way, but I'm like, he doesn't really like women that much, does he? I mean, just obviously he seems to like them sexually, but certainly not like as people. So I'm like, okay, so there's a great opening here for someone to write a Cold War spy book where like the women are like 3-dimensional characters. So I'm really excited to be able to be that person. But so John Le Carre, definitely great if you love spy stuff. Just remember that you're not going to get your fix of like the fully fledged female characters. And so that was what I was reading, but I cannot wait to start my summer reads. I've got Ellen Hildebrand's new book. She never fails, and I've heard the most amazing things about 28 Summers, and I cannot wait to get started on that. And what else? Oh, Fiona Davis's new book is coming out. Was that out this week or is it out next week?
It was supposed to be. They postponed it, so it's out, I think, like August 8th maybe, and I'm super excited. We're doing a virtual event with her and Suzanne Rindell, and I'm going to moderate, and I'm super excited to talk to both of them about it.
Oh, that sounds great. Oh, I know. And she is like the loveliest person. I can just tell you right now, just like the author, we do talk to each other, we know each other, and Fiona's like the sweetest person in the world. I adore her. So I'm very excited to read her book as well. So that's kind of what I'm focused. I've got a few things queued up, like books that I always meant to have read and never read. I'm going to read I Capture the Castle, which I can't believe I never read, but I never read it. So that is also on my list, ready to be read as soon as I'm mentally recovered from the stress of the past few weeks, having a book out and trying to finish another book at the same time.
Andrea asks, now that Her Last Flight is out, are you working on another Team W book?
Absolutely. We were supposed to, so we dropped a lot of hints about this, or actually we only dropped a 1-word hint about this on our book tour for All the Ways We Said Goodbye a million years ago. But our 1-word hint is Newport. So we were supposed to meet in Newport, Rhode Island at the beginning of May to get our book outlined. And obviously we had to cancel those reservations. We were brokenhearted because this is literally the reason we write these books, is so we can legitimately tell our husbands that we are leaving for a few days to work really, really hard on a book together in some really lovely location. And we could not do that. But thanks to the magic of FaceTime split screening, we were able to outline the whole book. We decided we were not going to wait for Corona to abate before, our readers need us, right, to give them this book. So it's all outlined, and we are just about to start the writing process. And it is Newport. I'll give you a little bit more of a hint. Gilded Age, 1950s, and the present day. And we just assigned characters. We assigned the characters after we're done outlining. So we just finished assigning the characters, and we're very excited about this one. It's all the ways we said goodbye, obviously set in France during World War I, World War II, and 1960s. A lot of very heavy material there. Obviously, this one has a little bit more of less historical events and more sort of family secrets sort of thing. So we're super excited about it, and we hope that at least at some point in the writing process we'll be able to go up to Newport and have our girls' weekend, which was, I mean, it's the reason we write these books. So I know we feel very cheated.
I'll just go and like sit 6 feet away from each other in a house.
I know, right? Exactly, with our masks on. I just bring them down to sip the wine.
Yeah, I was going to say that would potentially interfere with the wine.
Exactly.
Alicia wants to know, what do you want readers to take away from her last flight after they finished it?
So there's two things, because I can never narrow it down to one. And the first one just is a real appreciation for, and this is sort of the dedication, and luckily I happen to have a copy right here. So let me make sure I get to the men and women, to the women and men who took to the skies in their frail machines and gave their lives to make human air travel an everyday miracle. And one of the books I read as preparation for this book was Charles Lindbergh's account of his flight to Paris. And this is the one he wrote in the 1950s that is much sort of richer and deeper and goes into all his sort of, previous hijinks as an airmail pilot and a barnstormer. And one of the things he says is he's, flying 36 hours without sleeping from New York to Paris. As he's sort of looking out the window and thinking, just almost godlike you feel up there. And he's looking ahead to, one day, people are just going to get on an airplane and not think about it. And that's really sad, because they'll never know this feeling I have right now of just absolute awe at the miracle of flight. And, people gave their lives for that. I mean, we get on airplanes now, and it's only because there were these trailblazers out there who, were willing to take that danger for us, who were willing to get on board an airplane with, possibly not a very good chance of getting off it alive. And they did that. They weren't doing it for us specifically. They were doing it because, some people are just like that. They got to be the trailblazers. But, just an appreciation for just how hard it was, and how much innovation was crammed into a very short period of time to make flying an everyday miracle, as Lindbergh foresaw. So there's that. But there's also, I think, the element that is we often don't necessarily take away from reading biographies and nonfiction about these things and just focusing on the flyers, but just the effects on their families and the people who love them. I think that we military families, I'm sure, will relate to this, just sending your loved one off into danger and not knowing if they're going to come back, and then dealing with the person they become when they do return. So I think just that respect for both, both the person who goes out there and the person who gives that person to us, the families who give that person to us. And I guess that's really what I want people to close the book and appreciate is, just that sense of endurance and hardship and sacrifice, and how important it is for all of us to have people in our lives and people in society who are willing to take those risks and make those sacrifices.
One of my favorite parts of the book or moments is Irene ends up in Spain during the war and after Guernica, and her reaction to seeing planes be used to drop bombs, and something that she loves being used for that purpose. I thought that was a really, really powerful moment in the book.
Gosh, thank you. You're the first person who's mentioned that, and that was really important to me as I was. And it's a very short. So for a short period of time, Irene is in Spain during the Spanish Civil War. She's helping to sort of do relief flights, and yes, when she goes into Guernica after the bombing, it's sort of like she feels so betrayed. Here's this thing that she has done for such pure motives, opening up these horizons for human beings. And what do? They take them and drop bombs on people and cause this awful carnage, and she truly feels betrayed. And, and the quote that sort of starts off that section is, I'm not going to sort of flip through and bore everybody, but I think it was Jimmy Doolittle, and he was remember the Doolittle flight in World War II, the bombing raid that they did on Tokyo. And he talks about how, now here in this modern era, you can't win a war without a good Air Force, and you're going to lose if you don't have one. And that's so true. We have taken this thing, and for good or evil, because obviously, hey, dropping bombs in World War II helped, advance the end of war and sort of kill fascism. But the human cost, it allows us to reach civilians and cause so much civilian damage, and suddenly war becomes total war. And it is just, it is such a moral quandary if you think you're on the good side, but the bad side is doing this, so you have to do it in order to beat the bad guys. But doesn't that make you just as bad? I mean, just that moral dilemma. But human life is made up of agonizing moral dilemmas. There's no clean cut black and white. That's something Janie talks about, is you're going to be in a gray area, and you just have to deal with it. You just have to deal with that moral pain of being involved in something that causes others pain. And that's just the tragedy of the human condition, that we do these things to each other.
Pauline asks, in your research, what's the oddest fact you've ever come across?
Oh gosh, there are too many. If I can just try and focus on this book. Oh gosh, putting me on the spot here. The oddest historical fact, with aviation. So here I am, I'm researching all these. I'm going to take Eddie, and this is not necessarily an odd fact, but this is something I have no idea about. So Eddie Rickenbacker, who is one of these sort of pioneering pilots. And he started out as a race car driver in the turn of the century, just as race cars were becoming a thing. And I mean, if you thought the body count was bad with early aviation, the body count with racing cars in that era was, so he actually quit that and became a pilot as sort of like a safer thing to do. And he flew in World War I and was one of our first and most illustrious aces after not having even flown. And then he flies in World War I. So he survives. I mean, that is the triumph right there. I mean, the number of men who were killed is just ridiculous. They're, on the aviation scene in World War I. And then he becomes a barnstormer in the 1920s. Then he starts Eastern Airlines. If anyone's old enough like me to remember Eastern Airlines before it folded, he was one of the founding, the founding partners of Eastern Airlines. He was involved in a legendary crash of an Eastern Airlines DC-3 near Spartanburg, and as they were coming into Atlanta, and I mean, he barely survived. I mean, his injuries would have killed anybody else, and he was just lying there in agony for 24 hours before they could even get to this crash site. So then, in World War II, he is on a flight on one of these, I can't remember, it was either a B-23 or B-25, and that has to ditch in the Pacific Ocean. And for weeks, they're floating on rafts in the Pacific, and he survives that as well. So this guy has 9 lives. I had no idea about that. And he died at a comfortable old age. He survived all of that. So to me, it wasn't so much an odd fact, it was one of those revelations. I'd heard of Eddie Rickenbacker. I knew he was a World War I ace. I had no idea about this extraordinary life he led. And the other little odd fact was that Charles Lindbergh, did you know this, actually flew combat missions in World War II out in the Pacific. That I didn't know either. So that was kind of exciting news to read about. So again, I love all these little nuggets that you find, and unfortunately ends up going down a lot of rabbit holes that have nothing to do with the book. But it does, you know, I like to think that it all serves its purpose in giving you that sort of depth of knowledge that you can talk you know, knowledgeably and confidently about these things, and not, again, make them lectures, but to make them just part of the story.
So did people actually fly with their cats?
That I don't know. I can't remember why I decided to put a cat in there. I have often wanted to put, I have 3 rescue cats and a rescue beagle, and we adore them all. They are such an important part of our lives. But every time I try to put a pet in a book, I get involved in the story. I forget that the pet is supposed to be around. So I'm sort of like, the pet's in the first couple of scenes, and then I'm like 2/3 of the way through the book, I'm like, oh shoot, I lost the cat, you know, and it's because I'm so involved in the human stuff. So I was like, okay. I read this really moving story about some people who had taken their dog to the vet, and there was this cat owner there who, you know, the cat was about to go over the Rainbow Bridge, and I was really, tears are streaming down my face as I'm reading this essay, and I'm like, I got to put something like this in my next book. So I was like, okay, here's a cat, and I have to make her part of the story so I don't forget that she's in there as I'm writing the book and don't have to add her back later. So I made this cat, and she comes in the very first scene, and it's when Irene and Sam Mallory first meet, and there's this little cat, you know, they're in the same beach sand as they come in from surfing, and they adopt her, and they name her Sandy because beach, and she ends up being a stowaway on their big flight from you know, from California to Australia. And I had a lot of fun with her, and then there's a beagle involved as well. My daughter was laughing because, you know, she's the one who's like got the great bond with the beagle, and she hasn't read the book. My kids don't like to read my books. They find it creepy, but you know, so I was telling her, oh yeah, there's a part in the book where the dog has a little stomach ache, and they take him to the vet, and it turns out there's nothing actually wrong, and our dog is a bit of a hypochondriac, you have to understand. So Anna, my daughter, starts laughing. She's like, inspired by true events, huh, Mom? And I'm like, yeah, definitely. The Molly the Beagle in the book is very, not so loosely modeled on Bailey the Beagle here in our house.
So Sharon says she loves your books, and she was smitten by Emmeline Truelove and Lord Silverton. Are we going to see anything from them anytime soon?
So this is a reference to my alter ego, Juliana Gray. If you are a Beatriz fan, which I hope you all are, because I have 2 children in college as of next month, buy all the books, please. So my Juliana Gray books are available to be read if you're going through a Beatriz drought and you need more. And the last 2 are historical mystery, and they feature 2 characters. The first book is A Most Extraordinary Pursuit. The second book is A Strange Scottish Shore. You have to say that quickly and without having drunk any whiskey beforehand. And yes, these 2 characters, there's actually 3 characters. Max, who is the Duke of Olympia, kind of a holdover character from my previous Juliana Gray books. And Lord Silverton, who is this kind of gadabout classic, you know, seemingly brainless aristocrat, and Emmeline Truelove, a very straight-laced personal secretary. And yes, I left a bit of a cliffhanger at the end of A Strange Scottish Shore, not realizing that it was going to be a while before I would find time to write the next one. So I have actually been writing a serial novel on my website called The Library Passage, and I was about 3 or 4 chapters in when I realized that the Max in the Library Passage is one and the same as the Max in my Juliana Gray books. So I think those adventures might be continuing through that medium. I had to stop in order to finish this book, but I will be resuming the Library Passage very soon on my website, and we'll see what happens to them. I'm literally writing episode by episode, where I'm like, okay, what happens to them today? So we'll see. I really can't wait to see what happens next with those characters.
Awesome. So how do you find, because you're doing Team W books, you're doing your Beatriz books, like that's actually slowed down a little bit for you, because for a while you were doing like 2 Beatriz books a year.
I know I was, and I do need to buckle down. And this is a surprise. Luckily, I know that my editor and my agent do not watch these things because I can tell they were like, we really can't do 2 a year, and you know, just the Wicked, and so I'm going to surprise them with a Wicked City book sometime in the fall. I'm about to get started. I know what happens, and I can't wait. So surprise! So hopefully. Maybe there will be another Beatriz book stuck in there during the back half of the year at some point in the next year or two, whenever they can fit it into the publishing schedule. I am highly motivated, not just because having not published my first book till I was 40 years old, I just have a lot of stories I want to tell.
Yeah.
But the second reason is that I am supporting a husband, 4 kids, a dog, and 3 cats by my writing. So I just, even if I feel burnt out, I keep going. I keep going until the feeling goes away and I'm back into to loving what I do.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for chatting with us today, guys. If you were watching on Facebook, if you came in late, once our video is done, Facebook will archive it so you'll be able to watch the full thing. We'll also be uploading it to YouTube in the next couple of days. We've been chatting with Beatriz Williams about her new book, Her Last Flight. We actually have some signed copies at the store, so you can order those from murderbooks.com. We're still at the moment closed to the public, but we're doing mail orders and phone orders. So you can visit us at murderbooks.com, give us a shout. We can help you over the phone. I actually hand sold somebody a copy of A Certain Age through the window yesterday.
Yay, I love it. Yay, thank you.
And so we've got lots of her other books too. She's also sending us some book plates. So if you order one of the earlier paperbacks, we've got some signed book plates to go in with them. We are doing lots of virtual events. So make sure you take a look at murderbooks.com to see what all is coming up. Like I mentioned, I'll be chatting with Fiona Davis and Suzanne Rendell next month.
We're doing tune into that.
I'm so excited. Fiona's book is next in my stack because I have to read based on kind of what events we're doing. So I have to kind of pace myself for some stuff. But thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, Beatriz. I'm so glad we were able to do this.
I know, I wish I could give you a big hug right now, but I can't. But virtual hugs. And thanks to all of you readers for supporting independent booksellers. It's so important during this time to do that. And guess what? You can get signed books and they'll mail them to you. And it's just as easy as some other larger online booksellers. So support your local booksellers.
And if you find that you are not reading and you just want jigsaw puzzles, we have like a gazillion different varieties. So if you're looking for jigsaw puzzles, yeah, we have so many of them now. It's like we have 3 bookcases full of them. So
fabulous. It's my new addiction. The problem is it is an addiction. You're like, I have to stop now and walk away from the puzzle.
So, well, thank you again. We will definitely do this next time, hopefully in the store with drinks afterwards, and we'll see you soon.
Yes, thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.